Welcome to Peptide-Proof, where we break down the clinical science and formulation realities of cosmetic peptides. Today, we're looking at Argireline and exactly how it relaxes expression lines. We're going to strip away the marketing fluff and look right at the biological mechanics of Acetyl Hexapeptide-8. We're skipping the hype to focus entirely on what the clinical data actually proves about topical neuromuscular intervention. To do that, we'll follow this four-phase roadmap. First, we target the biological bottleneck. Second, we intercept the signal. Third, we penetrate the skin barrier. And finally, we optimize. Let's start with phase 1, target and locate that neuromuscular bottleneck. Now look at the diagram here. At the neuromuscular junction, every time you squint or frown, an electrical signal tells your cells to release acetylcholine across the synaptic gap. But for that to happen, these vesicles have to dock using what's called the snare complex. You can think of it like a molecular zipper made up of 3 proteins. When they zip together perfectly, your muscle contracts. And over decades of repeating that motion, that mechanical stress etches permanent lines into your face. This specific fusion step right here is our absolute biological bottleneck. Moving to phase 2, intercept. Let's see how we can actually chemically disrupt that exact signal. Argireline is basically an exact replica of a specific fragment of the SNAP25 protein. When you apply it, these peptide fragments flood the synapse and start competing for binding positions, essentially crowding out the real SNAP25. Because these fake copies are taking up all the space, that snare zipper we just talked about fails to form properly. The docking stations get blocked, acetylcholine release is restricted, and ultimately, the muscle receives a much weaker signal to contract. Looking at this diagnostic matrix, it's really important to understand how this process differs from injectables. Botulinum toxin, or Botox, permanently cleaves those snare proteins. That causes total paralysis for months until your body physically rebuilds them. Argireline, though, is a topical intervention. As you can see, it relies on reversible competitive binding. It doesn't destroy anything. It just temporarily crowds the space. Of course, there's a catch. To get that binding to happen, we have to get a pretty large peptide down to the muscle in the first place. That brings us to phase 3, penetrate. The stratum corneum, your outer skin layer, is essentially a brick wall designed to keep things out. The golden rule in formulation is that molecules over 500 Daltons just cannot cross it passively. Well, Argireline weighs in at roughly 889 Daltons, so it breaks that rule entirely. To bypass this barrier, formulators have to use advanced delivery systems like the 3 shown here. We're talking deep eutectic solvents to briefly disrupt the skin's lipids, dissolving microneedles that physically bridge the gap, or fluorinated chaperones that literally escort the peptide right across the cell membranes. Finally, phase 4, optimize. Let's look at how formulators actually maximize this peptide's efficacy in the real world. Taking a look at the 2026 ZOO dataset, the clinical outcomes are pretty clear. We see visible reductions in wrinkle depth and measurable increases in elastic fibers. But the crucial takeaway here is that this was a synergistic combination therapy. The most significant visible reductions don't come from using Argireline all by itself. They come from smart combination stacks, like mixing Argireline with Sineq and niacinamide. Because that combination and delivery aspect is so vital, the market is unfortunately flooded with poorly designed products. So let's look at 3 specific formulation anti-patterns that highlight some common consumer misconceptions. First up, concentration obsession. 10% isn't inherently better than 5%. Optimizing the delivery vehicle matters far more than just chasing a high label percentage. Second, packaging. Argireline actually oxidizes when it's exposed to air and light, which completely destroys its structure. So airless, opaque packaging is strictly required. And third, cycle disruption. Because this peptide competition is reversible, if you skip an application, you break the blockade. Sticking to a twice-daily routine is completely non-negotiable if you want results. To truly optimize this, advanced formulators rely on synergistic synthesis. Look at the 2026 BI study framework on screen. They created a triple peptide nanoparticle that attacks 3 distinct failure points all at once. Argireline blocks the presynaptic terminal, Sineq blocks the receptor on the muscle side, and mucotoxin stops the electrical signal further upstream. This kind of multi-pathway attack is significantly stronger than using any single peptide alone. Now, even with the absolute perfect formula, managing your expectations is key. Looking at this dual-track timeline graph, you can see why patients often misinterpret their results with neurotransmitter peptides. They act incredibly fast, often within minutes to hours. But that rapid muscle relaxation, that's really only half the battle. As you can see in this comparison, neurotransmitter peptides give you that rapid muscle relaxation to stop the mechanical creasing right away. But signal peptides like matricyle target the fibroblasts to synthesize collagen, and that's a biological process that takes weeks to months to show up. A complete, effective anti-aging strategy absolutely requires both of these pathways working together. So the ultimate takeaway here is that effective topical neuromodulation relies entirely on smart delivery systems and synergistic stacking. Argireline is a highly capable tool, but only when it's formulated with precision and applied with consistency. That's all for this episode. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.